Of all the Paper Mario games, Super Paper Mario is the most deceptive. The experience you might expect looking at the title screen or even playing through the first world does not really do justice to the rest of the game. That being said, please note that this video will be discussing major plot elements of Super Paper Mario all the way through the end. I know the game is well over a decade old at this point, but if you haven't experienced the story for yourself, please go do so. If not by playing it yourself, then at least through a Let's Play or other playthrough. This video will be here when you get back. My name's Ayden Machajewski. In honor of the new Paper Mario game, I've been going back through every Paper Mario game in the series' 20-year history to analyze each game's soundtrack and how they use music to enrich the gameplay experience. Today we're looking at Super Paper Mario, released on the Nintendo Wii in 2007. This game has a strange position among its fellow entries. It's not truly a sequel to the original or to Thousand Year Door, at least not in terms of gameplay, but it also doesn't share the same light-hearted, papery spirit as its successors. To start the soundtrack review, I'd like to go over a few similarities Super shares with 64 and Thousand Year Door. For one, Super Paper Mario continues the trend of using classic Mario platformer material in its music. Just like in Thousand Year Door, the first chapter of the game references the classic 1-1 theme, developing the opening fanfare into a fleshed-out melody. It also quotes Super Mario World's athletic theme in the B section. I don't want to spend too much time on references, as Super Paper Mario doesn't rely on them nearly as much as 64 or even Thousand Year Door did. Admittedly, it's a bit strange considering this game is a platformer, but perhaps that just means there's less need to ground the game as a Mario game. As far as adaptive music techniques go, Super Paper Mario is similar to its predecessors. It's completely barren of any interesting adaptive tracks. No modified music for different shops in Flipside, no special effects while in 3D mode, nothing. With everything else the soundtrack has to offer, this is by far the most disappointing aspect to me. But enough about what Super Paper Mario doesn't have. Much of Super's soundtrack can be categorized for one of two purposes: fleshing out the worlds and giving them character, or scoring story elements. The location-specific music, on the whole, is cheerier and more distinct than the story-related music, by which I mean there aren't many recurring themes. Each track has a distinct melody without necessarily pulling melodic material or motifs from other tracks. Similar to its predecessors, Super Paper Mario's soundtrack helps distinguish the locations featured in each of the game's 8 chapters. There are some significant exceptions to this distinction rule. First, listen to how similar the melodies in Merle's Mansion and Fort Francis are to each other, despite the significant difference in style and meter. This is a great example of how to take the same melodic material and adapt it to different styles. But that being said, this is a really strange connection for the music to be making. I thought at first this might be a common dungeon melody shared among other locations in the game, but no other track shares this melody, not even in the first world's dungeon. Both tracks are certainly well composed, but it's unclear what goal the composers had in relating these two locations. It's interesting compositionally, but it's a somewhat irrelevant detail within the context of the game itself. However, there is a set of location-based tracks that successfully relate their locations through the shared melodic material: Flipside, Flopside, and Castle Black. Now, I don't think the relation between Flipside and Flopside is any secret, considering to what lengths the game goes to point this out. I mean, they're quite literally mirror images of one another. You travel through a mirror to get between the two towns. Of course, this doesn't mean the tracks are the same, but the difference is somewhat subtle. Flipside uses a bright bell instrument for its accompaniment, a stately bass note every bar, which somewhat resembles an upright bass. Flopside takes the same melody in a very similar lead instrument. However, the accompanying instruments generally occupy a lower register than in the flipside version. The real star here is the bass line, which jumps around more similar to a funk slap bass line. As a whole, this version is more syncopated, even down to its swing feel. These subtle differences are great, and wonderfully represent how, despite in the grand scheme of things, the two towns are mirrored copies of each other, flopside residents tend to have a bit more attitude than their flipside counterparts. Without these small musical distinctions, it would be really easy for this idea of a mirrored town to come across as lazy or stale. But by switching up the arrangement, it keeps both towns completely linked and related, but still distinct in character. Of course, I also said the Castle Black theme shared this melodic material, and it does. Take a careful listen. We're starting to encroach on story music territory here, so let me keep my analysis brief. Near the end of the game, and especially throughout the final chapter, the writing is constantly drawing connections between Count Bleck and his minions and the four heroes. Each segment leading up to the final battle pairs one hero with one minion, Bowser and Ochunks, Peach and Mimi, and Luigi with Dimentio. Relating Castle Bleck to Flipside acknowledges the similarities between the protagonists and antagonists by implying Castle Bleck, the home base for the antagonists, is thematically related to Flipside, the home base for Mario and company. Our last exception to distinct location tracks is the introduction to each world. Every introduction plays off the same motif, which itself is a snippet of the Flipside theme, just using the instrumentation and style of the world itself. Similarly to the Flipside and Castle Bleck exceptions, these tracks are exceptions for how they relate to the story. Each intro song acts as a transition between the story-heavy music of the game and the more gameplay-focused tracks. Considering how the beginning of each world is usually preceded by an intermission at Castle Bleck, a memory, and a talk with Merlin about the light prognosticus. The introductions smooth out the transition from these connected story beats to the seemingly unconnected worlds by reminding the player that all the platforming they're about to do is because of their role as the prophesized hero. Which finally brings us to where Super Paper Mario truly excels, its story. Now, I've seen some debate as to whether or not Super Paper Mario's story is actually better than Thousand Year Door or not, but I think Super's soundtrack may actually push it over its predecessor in this aspect. Let me explain. In Thousand Year Door, there's a serious lack of musical continuity. The only thing you really get is the intro story theme returning at the very end of the game. As a result, the music itself doesn't really convey any information about the story, it merely just scores the emotional beats. Super Paper Mario, on the other hand, through its masterful use of leitmotifs, adds new information to the story, adds depth, and adds thematic significance, with all the same emotional power, if not more, as Thousand Year Door. Let's break down some of the leitmotifs that feature in the game. First and foremost is the aforementioned Four Heroes theme. Here it is prominently in the track Open the Next Door. Second, and perhaps most famous, is the leitmotif for Count Bleck. It's initially used to represent the Dark Prognosticus, as well as Bleck's evil shenanigans, but it's ultimately representative of the man himself, including Blumiere. Check it out in its initial form in the track, The Evil Count Bleck. Finally, after every chapter, a brief memory segment featuring timpani and Blumiere plays. The motif that features during each segment is what I'll call the memory motif. The memory tracks are its most common appearance, and yes, I did say tracks. There are actually 4 different memory tracks each getting progressively more involved every other world. The first track merely has a simple piano melody with limited bass. Over the course of the game, new instruments are added one at a time. An accordion, a synth pad, and a synth lead all join in accompaniment. This method of slowly adding instruments with each version, especially over the course of the whole game, is great. It suggests these memories are slowly becoming more vivid, which they are. Tippy begins to remember her former self over the course of the entire game. As an aside, I love the mechanical sounds in the memory tracks. There's a mechanical whirring that represents an old-fashioned film projector, which really helps sell the idea that these are old memories. Additionally, there's a clock ticking sound persistent through each version, but it's not just in the memory tracks. There are so many clocks in this game's music. Seriously, it's everywhere. Honestly, when I first listened through the soundtrack, I wasn't sure what to make of this. The game isn't really about time, I thought, but don't be mistaken, time is definitely a recurring theme throughout the game. The impending end of all worlds is extremely time-sensitive, framing the story as a race against the clock. Even beyond that, there's many references to the past. The ancients who planned the game's events 1,500 years prior, or the memories and lost time between Tippy and Count Bleck. The game is constantly reminding you that everything, past and present, is leading up to your final confrontation against the Chaos Heart. So, we have 4 major leitmotifs at play, each representing a major idea or character. The clock isn't actually a leitmotif, as there's no melodic material, but it accomplishes a similar purpose by symbolizing a certain idea, so I'm gonna include it. There's also certainly more leitmotifs present than just these ones, mostly for each of Count Bleck's minions. But with the possible exception of Dementio's theme, these don't really get played in all too many tracks, usually just a character theme and a battle theme. All of these motifs come together in Bounding Through Time, my favorite track in the game. It starts similarly to the prior memory tracks, but with a fuller orchestration, xylophone replacing the piano for the memory motif, and strings swelling to take over as melody. Count Bleck motif in the same organ instrument, but with a brighter tonality and statelier pace, emerges, representing Blumiere's newfound hope and resolve. As if to express Timpani's continued love for Blumiere, the Bleck motif is repeated, but with a violin and mallet pairing, reminiscent of the instrumentation used for Tippy, Mario, and company throughout the game. Next, the Four Heroes theme emerges triumphantly in a solo trumpet at the climax of the piece. This tells the player how the light prognosticus is now succeeding over the dark. Finally, the track relaxes, returning to the same memory motif it began with. At this point, Blumiere and Timpani are having their own private moment, separate from the other characters. Memories wash over them as they reminisce. clock also returns, a final reminder of the time-sensitive nature of what they must do. While at this point we will not see Lumiere or Timpani again, the track continues as we look back on the main characters, as well as the restoration of several of the worlds visited in the game. It offsets this moment of victory and grand restoration with a simple but genuinely heartfelt love story, creating a profoundly quiet moment of catharsis. Not only does the union of all of these motifs perfectly frame the story beats as they happen, but it invites the player to reflect on all they've done. Each motif floods critical parts of the game. The memory motif appeared after every chapter, in quiet moments that, at first, dramatically stand out from the tone of the rest of the game. The Black motif appears before each chapter, as well as in several critical boss fights and story moments. The Four Heroes motif appears everywhere, from the opening of the game to each heart pillar to the introduction of every world. And I've already discussed how universally a ticking clock is used. The great power of leitmotifs, and a great power of music in general, is its capacity to build associations to experiences and emotions, and then let us recall those same feelings much later. The reason Bounding Through Time, as well as many of the other tracks I didn't find time to address, hits so hard is because of how it calls back to many of the game's most satisfying, emotional, and/or exciting moments. That is how you score a meaningful story. I was worried about potentially boxing myself in with this soundtrack's rating, but after spending so much time revisiting the game, simply enjoying its music, and combing through its impressive uses of leitmotif, I wouldn't feel justified giving it any other rating. I rate Super Paper Mario's soundtrack as a 10 out of 10 for its well thought out and intricate structure of musical ideas. There's so much about this game's soundtrack that I wanted to talk about, but I had to cut just to get this video out fast enough. Maybe I'm saying this too prematurely, since I have yet to review the soundtracks of any of the newer Paper Mario games, but I think Super Paper Mario has the best utilized soundtrack of any Paper Mario game. Hey, thanks for watching to the end. Super Paper Mario was actually my first experience with the Paper Mario series, so it's been an absolute blast to play through and analyze a game I was never able to finish as a child. I'd love to hear about y'all's experiences with this game or its music, so be sure to tell me what you think in the comments. If you haven't already, consider checking out the previous video where I review Paper Mario 64 and Thousand Year Door, analyzing both games on their intro music. If you want to see my upcoming soundtrack reviews for Sticker Star, Color Splash, and eventually the Origami King, or other videos about the implementation and creation of music for video games, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Until next time.